although Amanda is a fantastic, amazing actress, today we're going to talk to Amanda Deibert about some writing tips, secrets, techniques, and whatever, but we can still segue into all these other sort of, other points, because Amanda can and has done almost all of it. So first, tell me all the facets of what you do when you're a writer, like all the ways you are a writer.
Oh, wow. That's a good, that's a good question, because sometimes I don't know the answer myself. Because I do a lot of different forms of writing. So I am a television writer right now. I am writing for the new upcoming animated He-Man on Netflix. Wrote several episodes of season 1. Very excited about that. I also have a show that I'm the head writer, supervising producer of on Quibi that's called Sexology. And so whereas He-Man is an animated and, fictional narrative story, Sexology is about sex and relationships and dating advice. And it's, more akin to being a talk show, but with, kind of more sexual and heavier things like double penetration or dildos or, whatever the case may be.
That's great.
And then I'm also, I've also written for 4 years, I was the writer for Vice President Al Gore's 24 Hours of Reality, which is an international climate broadcast, which would film live around the globe for 24 hours. And I wrote the entire 520-page script all 4 years, and would stay in the control room for 36 hours straight without going to bed while we were live. And I've also, done a smattering of different kinds of TV stuff. I'm also a comic book writer. I write for DC Comics. I do, right now I'm doing DC Superhero Girls. I also just did for Halloween, DC's The Doomed and the Damned, which I have a horror Wonder Woman and Raven team up. I also did John Carpenter's Tales for Halloween Night. This is, I think, volume 6, but I'm in every volume from volume 2. I do a horror story that I team up with my wife, who's an illustrator, Kat Staggs, and we do horror stories for that every year. But yeah, a lot of comic books, a lot of TVs, a lot of different genres. I occasionally write essays and things like that as well.
What's your favorite, if you had to say, your favorite genre of, no matter what the platform?
It's twofold. I have found that I actually really like writing like middle grade and for children. I think that the response is so I don't know, so unfiltered, so unpretentious, so whatever, you get to be kind of more raw and vulnerable in your writing. It's all right on the surface, and then the kids' responses to it are also so kind of open, and there's no pretense in between. So I love doing that. I love writing for kids. And then my other favorite is actually the horror writing. I have found to be a lot more fun than I ever anticipated when getting into it. I mean, I remember the first time that Sandy King Carpenter asked me to write for a volume 2 of John Carpenter's Tales for Halloween Night. She's like, I'm going to drag you into horror. And I was like, sure. And then I was like, oh God, I love this. And so I've been doing it ever since.
Amazing. Have you done it much film stuff or long format, or mostly TV, comics, and other than, when I say long form, I don't mean the 36-hour, 24-hour live nonstop, but like a fictional.
Oh, you mean horror? Not anything that's been produced. When I was a screenwriting minor in college, and actually the first time I ever wrote a feature film, I wrote a horror film, and I was the only person in my program to do that. So I guess it's always kind of been there, dormant. And then I know that you and I have dabbled with writing a horror pilot together. But those are the only two things long form I've other than the comic books. I haven't ever like written a television series or I have an unproduced horror pilot that I would love to do that I just wrote this year, but nothing that's actually seen the light of day.
Cool. Well, I mean, not cool because they should see the light of day, but I mean, great. So, okay, I have heard the story before and I know parts of it, but I still can't remember the whole story. So when you're doing Al Gore and you're in Paris, do you want to tell us that story about how insane it was?
Sure. I can tell a story about being live in the middle of an ISIS attack, which is my...
Not many people can.
So this is my, I know. This is my, when I go in for a job interview now and somebody's like, this is a very stressful show. I don't know if you'll be able to handle it. This is the story that I pull out as like, sure, I'm sure that sometimes the EP might yell at somebody. And that is my first year writing for former Vice President Gore. For 24 Hours of Reality. It was right before the Paris Agreement was signed. So we're talking late 2015. It was November of 2015. And I had written the whole script here in Los Angeles, which was the 520 pages. So it's a broadcast. And basically the idea is that it goes around the world. There's like a hub where like the main people are, where Vice President Gore is, where a lot of guests come. But then there's also hubs around the world that we hit via satellite so that we're kind of in prime time in different places around the world as we're around the world. And it's a very like global broadcast. So because it was right before the Paris Agreement, we went to Paris. So we were live at the base of the Eiffel Tower. We had this beautiful like dome that was see-through, that was our set. So you could see the Eiffel Tower doing its, beautiful lights every hour. I mean, it was just like a very spectacular place. And we're there and we go live the evening of the 13th. And we go live, Duran Duran's there, they open up, they're on our stage, they play, it's great. We talk to different people, dignitaries, celebrities, all these things. We're live for a couple hours when the ISIS attacks that happened in Paris that year started happening simultaneously while we were live. So at the Bataclan, at the various sites. And President Hollande was supposed to be coming from the soccer match that he was at when they struck to our set. And so it all started to happen. Half of our crew were Parisian. So they're getting, frantic phone calls. They're worried about loved ones. We're also at the base of the Eiffel Tower. We have people from the Obama administration with us. We have the mayors of Paris with us. So we have former Vice President Gore. We have dignitaries, we have celebrities, and we're like concerned that we might be a target for all those obvious reasons. And also the Eiffel Tower being a symbol as it is. And we're just sitting out in the open. And so President Hollande sent some military to come like surround us, but we had to shelter in place. But we also stayed live because there's the diplomacy situation of the former Vice President of the United States can't give a statement from Paris before the President of France has given a statement. So we just stay live, but we don't want to be live from the base. So we keep going to the satellite to our host in Brazil. And we're like, we're staying in Brazil. So we're on the fly, giving our Brazilian host more and more things to say. We're running music videos that certain recording artists had pre-recorded for us to play at certain, and we're just like loading them in. So like we're playing all these music videos. We're staying live. We're trying to figure out stuff. So I'm on the fly trying to, because that's my job. It's live. So I write all the script before, but things happen on the fly. And my job is to write the copy for the host that might happen on the fly to help them fill in for, any crazy thing that might happen. Only in this case, it was like the most crazy thing. And I personally had a 10-month-old. It was the first time I had ever left her for any amount of time or gone anywhere. So she was home in Los Angeles with my wife. I was still so I was concerned about that. They were concerned about me. So it was a lot. And we stayed live for a couple more hours. And then we had to continue to shelter in place even after we were able to go off air. We had to stay where we were because it wasn't safe for us to like go back to our hotels or go anywhere. And so we stayed for hours and hours. And then finally they let us like just go back to our hotels. And we went back to our hotels. We drank every bottle of wine in the vicinity of, like, we drank all the wine in Paris that night. No, because nobody was going to sleep. Everyone was worried. The woman running our hotel, her brother had been at the concert and she didn't know if he was okay. You know, I mean, it was just such a vulnerable, raw thing. Everyone was scared. Everyone was sad. Everybody, in the days after, it was kind of an amazing time to be there because everyone was so united, and the French are fucking resilient, if nothing. Because a lot of them were just out in cafes the very next day when they hadn't even caught anyone on the loose or really knew what happened. But yeah, it was a very interesting time to be live. It was a very interesting time to try to write on the fly. And when anybody says anything about a stressful job, I laugh.
That is incredible. I mean, it's every time I hear it, it's just, I can't even believe that that's coming out of your mouth. I'm just like, oh my God,
Same.
That's insane. How do you, is there a trick on how you are able to keep the focus in having to write something and be creative, or at least spinning the wheels in a moment like that?
I think it's just, on one hand, it's so, you're like, oh, great, I have something to focus on because everything's crazy. And the scenarios you're going to work up in your mind is that, like, you don't know if somebody's going to come around the corner and that's it. So, you know, in a way, having something to focus on of like, what music videos should we cut to? What should we have the host in Brazil say? And like, also they have a translator who has to then like throw it into Portuguese on the fly. Like, you know, there's all these like things. And so having all the moving parts to think about, I actually think was a bit helpful. I also, you know, my background, how I started in TV writing was live daily. So I am used to like a high pressure, very fast. You can't have writer's block because there's no time. So you just like, you have to write something because they have to say something. So good enough sometimes is the best you can do. But yeah, that's kind of it.
Would you say that the experience of writing for live TV was a muscle that you didn't know you had, or that was developing throughout that process?
Yeah, I owe a lot to the fact that I started in live. I think like it's changed so much about me as a writer and as a person. Just in general. I mean, that experience aside is just because of that. I think, you know, the most valuable thing is what I just said, is like, you don't have time to have writer's block. You don't get to get precious. You want to do the best you can, but there's this idea of like, if you come in when you start, but you know you're going to be taping that day at 4, and whatever you have written between now and 4 is what somebody's going to go on television and say. So you end up like shitting out your first draft very quickly and then rewriting, because that's the time that you have. And I think even though I don't do live, like I'm not doing anything live right now, it still helps me to be very quick about getting a first draft out, to not agonize if I feel like something's not right, because I know, like, you know what, I'm going to come back to that. Like, I don't like that sentence, but I'll deal with that sentence later, because let me get to the gist of what I want to say. And then sometimes, a lot of times what happens is you realize you can just cut that sentence because everything else actually works with that. Like, I found more times than anything that the sentence that I wanted to spend 3 hours agonizing on, once I write everything else, doesn't even need to be there in the first place, because it was just a bridge I thought I needed that I didn't.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's a really good tool. I mean, I talk a little bit about that in my book, where I talk about, like, when I'm working on something, which, since we've co-written together, you're familiar with this too. It's like, you come along to the scene, you don't know at that moment what the scene should be. You just know that it needs to be there.
Right.
So you just put like a placeholder, right? And then keep going. Although I don't know if I've ever had the situation where I've gone back and said, oh, I don't need that scene or that line or anything like that. I think that's cool. I think that's really fascinating. And next time I'm doing that, I'm going to ask myself, do I even need that line? Because that's a really cool thing.
I mean, it's not always, but I found it to be true more often than not. is that if I'm really, really stuck on something, that usually it's actually the next thing that I'm actually like trying to get to, or it's something earlier that needed to be, you know, but it's usually not, the problem's usually not right there. It's either earlier that I needed to set it up better, or that right after I'm going to say it and it'll be redundant.
Totally. And I can see how that, I mean, if you're used to the idea of just getting it out, you know, throwing it on the wall and deal with it later, helps you in any number of other mediums, whether it's, you know, comics or TV or you know, not live, but just any sort of thing. When you went into live TV, do you remember the first few moments? Was it difficult at first, or was it just always just go with it?
Sure. It was difficult at first. And I got that, you know, I got lucky. The first thing, which wasn't live, it was like live to tape, which is like a little bit of a cheat. But the first thing I ever did was a very short little show on HULU that was like their first foray into original content. So this was like way back in the end of 2010. I started as the writer's assistant on a show called The Morning After, which was just like a comedy, like kind of like recap thing. And then I was promoted to the writing staff. And so like that got me used to like the really quick, because we'd come in at like 2 and tape at like 8 p.m., like 2 p.m. and tape at like 8 p.m. And so I always had to write some sort of like extended full of B-roll monologue that was usually like a couple minutes long in just a few hours. And so that helped me build the muscle. And then I went to like real live show on Pivot shortly after that. And yeah, it's kind of being thrown to the wolves, but you also, because you're doing it daily, you also kind of get in the habit of like, okay, I didn't love that one, but tomorrow there's a whole new one and I have now forgotten about that because I have 5 more episodes to take, you know. And so like you also kind of learn to like get over it when you have a swing and a miss. And of course, everything's like good enough to go on TV, and like you've got other people above you that are looking at things and making sure that you haven't just like completely ruined the show. But you do kind of learn that like they're not all going to be the most amazing thing you've ever written, and that's okay.
When you ask, or when you talked about other people and working for producers and other execs or anybody that's sort of higher up that's sort of making decisions, not just with live, but with any project you've ever worked on, where was the moment with the most interference that sort of kept you from really saying what you felt needed to be said? And on the flip side, what was the one with the least interference? And you don't have to be specific if you don't want to name names or anything, but just like the general idea.
You know, it really goes, I mean, for the most part, I've been lucky in that I haven't had the experience of having a boss who's like, no, you can't write this. Like, no, like if there is something, it'll be because like, oh, legal came back and we can't legally say this or do this for some reason that has to do with like, you know, we don't have the rights to this or like whatever. I haven't had any kind of situation where I've just felt like really stifled. I think actually the 24 Hours of Reality was probably one of the most mind-blowingly loose situations I ever had, where it was a boss. I had worked for the executive producer on another late night show. And then he was executive producing 24 Hours of Reality, and he brought me on to write it. And he was just like, yeah, Amanda can write this. This is fine. They had the years before, they had a writer who was a writer from Colbert, and she wasn't available that year. And so my boss was just like, yeah, Amanda can do it. She can do it. And I came in and I kind of figured at some point, like someone would show me the ropes or whatever. And they were just like, write the show. And it was like, I was like, oh my gosh. And I was so scared and I was so intimidated, and there was so much focus, and it was like all over the world and all these high profile people. And then it was totally fine. And I think actually him like just having that trust in me and being like, oh, this will be fine, gave me the but like, oh, I guess if he thinks it'll be okay, it'll be okay.
That's so crazy.
I know.
Well, and that's why I was curious, because you sometimes think that something like that would be super, you know, controlled and not loose at all, or just really, you know, structured. And then you'd think that, you know, the least thing would have been like something that you would have thought the otherwise, you know, the other side.
I have found, and I found this to be true in comics, I found this to be true in films, I found this to be true in TV, that in general, it's like the bigger a project, the bigger the company, the bigger the whatever, the more faith they've put in me, because it's like, we hired you for the reason, it's you that we want, it's this. And the smaller something is, and I think it's a lot of times because the smaller things are greener, that tends to be where people want to hold on to control a little more and micromanage a little more and hang on to it. And I think it has to do with, like, once you get to a certain level where you're used to working with people who are the best at what they do, you just kind of trust that they are the best at what they do. Because
that makes so much sense.
I mean, of course, like, there's legal people looking over everything to make sure you don't have diplomatic problems. And there's scientists looking over all the climate things to make sure that you're not saying something that isn't sound. But other than that, it's like, go for it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's weird.
It's so weird. Do you have any writing rituals?
Oh, I wish.
You don't have time. You don't have time for rituals.
Well, I was gonna say, as now a mother in a pandemic, I am writing while helping teach distance kindergarten. So it's like literally me at the dining room table, my daughter right next to me writing, and then helping her like get set up. Okay, this is how you're going to do this math page. This is what you're going to do. Okay. And then while she's doing it, then I'm checking it. Then we're talking and playing. So it's any even illusion of a ritual has kind of gone out the window. I mean, I do generally, I like to, if I can, I like to have music playing with no lyrics, because lyrics distract me. I like to have a good cup of coffee or a good glass of wine, depending on the time of day, and like light a candle or some incense. And like, that's my ideal situation. But I haven't had that in a very long time, so.
I understand. I asked because one time, I think it was for my second movie, I had this whole thing, I don't know what I was thinking, but I had this like mirror, this like huge like table mirror that I put down, and then I had candles, and I decided to write it in ballpoint pen, and I put it on like, you know, paper, like physical like notebook paper, and like I had all this stuff. And I think I did also have like classical music with no lyrics or anything, but it was like I was making a seance in order to create this thing. And I had never done that since, but I always like think about like, ooh, maybe there could be, you know, some kind of like trick. And along that line, do you prefer, or is it the same, creating or writing during the day versus the night, with the sun out versus the sunset?
I like both. I used to be a night writer, much more hardcore. But now I tend to be like so tired from a long day with my daughter that I don't go quite as late into the night anymore, unless I really have to. Like, if I've really just got to bang something out, then I will. But yeah, it's kind of, the time of day is kind of same diff to me. It's just, if I can get some quiet time and actually write, then I'm happy with it. I am a notebook user. Like, I know some people keep everything in their computers and do it all, their notes and whatever. Even if I have to do a digital outline, like for television, like for He-Man, for example, like you have to turn in an outline before you can ever turn in a script, and they're very detailed. I mean, it's scene by scene outlines that are just like really comprehensive. But even then, I will still have like my first pass at an outline, it's still in a notebook, like, and my notes to myself, if I think of something I want to put in later, like there's something about pen to paper for me that I can't live without.
Do you have your own shorthand to yourself when you're writing? Like,
a little bit.
Like you just kind of scribble it, but you know what you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Like it's more like notes to myself. Like, don't forget that you want to do this. This is like, you know, a funny thing that you want to go back to later or whatever.
I ask because sometimes, like, let's say it's in the evening, I've finished dinner, I've had 3 glasses of wine, I'm tired, I'm almost ready for bed, but I'll get an idea. And I'll write it down, and I'll be so furiously writing it because it's coming at me faster than my pen can move. And I get up in the morning and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what is this? Like, I can't even read it. But some days I can, and I've sort of tried to develop, you know, if I'm going to write the word night, I'll just N-I-J, but I can kind of figure out that I meant the word night. And so I was just curious about that, if you had any like tricks on how to, because for the people who are primarily visual versus auditory, like my pictures come faster than my hand can write, whether or not I'm doing it by hand or on the computer. But if I'm on the computer, I can't do shorthand to myself. So it's like there's a disjointedness, but I was wondering if there were any tricks to that, or is it just something that, I don't know, everybody's different?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything tried or true. I mean, I'll usually like kind of jot out the keywords first, as opposed to like writing, you know, I'm not going to write like a paragraph to myself about how I see it. It's more like, you know, oh, cool thing with the whatever, you know, just to quickly remind myself. And then I hope that I hang on to it.
Cool. Have you done a children's book?
Comics only.
Just comics, but not like an actual like.
Not like a picture book, no. Like the DC superhero girls. That's I mean, I have shorter ones too, but I have like a 120 page graphic novel that's middle grade. But nothing. I haven't ever. That's so middle grade. I think it's like 7 to 12 is the target. But my daughter who's 5 loves it, and so I think it, you know, it can kind of branch. But like the key demo is like right at that like kind of like pre-teeny.
Cool. What have you've told us so much about what you do. Are you currently working on something that you're excited about telling us, so that you can tell us that's not top secret?
Let's see. Well, He-Man hasn't come out yet, so I'm excited about that. I do have another, I think I can say that I have another DC superhero girls graphic novel coming out. And yeah, I have a few other like little books coming out. Like I have, DC did a Wonder Woman of History, which is a like mini autobiographical stories of real, or not biographies of real women, historical figures. And Kat and I did that together, and we did the story of Edie Windsor and her win in the Supreme Court and how that helped with LGBTQ equality. And that comes out, I think, in December. And then in January, I have a Flashbacks, which is it's a science book for kids. And I have a story about how electricity works and gets in our home with Green Lantern. So,
oh, cool.
Some fun little things here and there.
That's amazing.
It's fun.
Okay, so you went to school for screenwriting for college.
I did. Well, I went to school. I was a drama major and then minored in screenwriting.
Okay. Had you gotten any sort of bug for writing really prior? I mean, when did you start writing? Like, do you remember how old you were, or like what sort of caused you to put a story down on something?
Oh, I mean, for always. I have like a ledger that was like one of my grandfather's like ledgers that he would use for accounting, that I took over and made like Amanda's book of mini stories, and that I wrote and illustrated, that I would like then read to my cousin who was younger. And that I was probably like 4 or 5 when I started doing that. I've always been a storyteller. I won like, you know, like a little like, you know, local newspaper story writing competition when I was in elementary school. Like it was always a thing I was doing. Like I've always been a writer and a reader. I was that kid that was just like, you know, hook my arm around my mom's in the grocery store so that I could keep reading without running into things.
Do you remember what was your first book that really shaped or like influenced you?
Hmm.
And if not the first, what was maybe a book in your life that really impacted you?
I mean, I think it's a little girl, probably like the Anne of Green Gables books. I remember being really, really obsessed with those as a little girl. But I was a voracious reader. I read things I probably like, you know, I was reading classics that I probably shouldn't have read Jane Eyre before middle school, but like I did. I was just books in general shaped me. Like I was constantly escaping into a book, constantly reading.
Do you have any favorites currently?
One of my favorite books of all time is Neil Gaiman's American Gods. It really hits my sweet spot of mythology and fantasy and reality, and I love that one a lot. But I mean, my favorite book list is long.
Amazing. All right, cool. It's always good to read. Do you prefer holding it or listening to it? Like versus
I prefer
like
holding it.
Yeah.
I prefer holding it, but like right now, with the way life is, I listen to books more than I have time to just sit and read, because then I can multitask, which is like the only time I get to. Like right now I'm listening to Lovecraft Country, because I started watching the show and then I loved it, and then I found out it was a book, and so now I'm also listening to the book, and it's amazing.
Cool. Would you recommend listening to the book before doing the show, watching the show?
I think so, but I haven't finished the book, and I'm obsessed with the show, and I really like the book too. So I'm kind of enjoying doing simultaneous, because I love the show so much that the book kind of is getting me through the in-between every week while I'm waiting for the next episode of the show.
Oh, that's courageous. I can't barely handle it when I can't immediately start the next episode when I have finished one. And even not necessarily that I'm going to watch that next episode tonight, but it better be available tomorrow. So it's like, if I have to wait 7 days, I would much rather just wait a year until it's available, and I could just do that every night.
I understand. Binging has ruined us, because I am often the same. I prefer to binge something, but
that's always why I won't never get into a TV show that I don't know that there's an ending to, because I like Carnival I loved, and it just ended on season 2, so there's never an ending to it, and it just drives me nuts not ever knowing the ending to a story from a TV show. So I can
totally. Jake, on that same note, since you just popped in, I want to turn the attention just to say hello to you for a moment. You did our special makeup effects for Helltown, which is a great seasonally perfectly timed movie to watch for all of those that came in after we talked about Helltown. It's on Amazon Prime. It stars Amanda, and it's one of the classic death scenes in modern cinema. And I'm not saying that with hyperbole. I'm totally serious. If you ask other people, they agree. And in fact, other people said it before I'm saying it now. So I feel like it's okay for me to say it. Also, I would like to open it up now in our final 20 minutes or so. Q&A with either me or Amanda about writing in general, or the specific, I'd like to keep it sort of light in the process of writing, not necessarily how do I get a job here, or how do I, whatever. I just keep it sort of about the process, the creative process, if we can. Unless there's a really, urgent question somebody has about, some advice they need or something. Yes, Doug.
Yeah, Amanda, do you have to write in people's voices? You say you write quick, and I know some news people have their own rhythms and all of that. Do you have to be aware of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a special skill that I've definitely honed over the years. It's easier to write for people if I've gotten to know them, or I've written for them before. Like Shan Boudram, who's the host of Sexology, I wrote for her on a previous show. So I've worked with her for like 4 years, so I can write in her voice fairly easily. And sometimes, I mean, you want to hit as close to people's voices as possible. So you do what you can. Sometimes it's not always possible, but yes.
When you write for someone's voice like Bono, does he say what you've written, or does he say whatever he wants?
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's a toss up. So like with things like that, where you're writing like a really quick, like, oh, this celebrity is just going to say this thing for this PSA. Usually it's a little more of a roadmap, and you know, they're going to ad lib their own stuff. But sometimes people will stick to verbatim what you write. So you try to get it to be at least kind of the way they would say it. Like you don't want to have them sounding like, I don't know, a teenager when they're not, or really slangy when that's not how they speak, or really stilted when that's not how they speak. But then, yeah, most of the time when you're talking about live stuff or host copy or things for celebrities, like usually people will sprinkle in a bit of their own personality as well. And you want that.
I was going to say, briefly worked in television here locally, and Steve knows this person, but one of the major anchors here, you would write whatever you wanted to for him, and he would just scan, like even live, would just scan it and pick out choice words that would trigger whatever you'd say. So, I was just always curious to see that I always called him the local Ron Burgundy, because kind of like the opposite, he wouldn't read it verbatim. He would just pick and choose what he wanted off of a script and then make it his own.
Interesting.
That's pretty common. I mean, especially for people who've been doing it for a long time. I mean, the more experienced somebody is with that, the more they're going to do it. Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything for the moment?
Yeah. Can I say?
Please, please.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know if you heard me or not. First of all, thank you, Steve, for hosting this event. And I bought your book, and I'm holding it. Yeah, I like to hold it. And Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your experience. It's incredible. And it's just amazing to me that you guys can share such things. And I mean, in film school, you pay a lot of money for this, you know. I mean, I've never been to a film school. I bought a Mercedes instead. Just kidding. Like in your book where you're saying you pay so much for the film school, you might as well just buy a Mercedes. And so I was going to go to a film school. Instead, I bought a Mercedes. So I didn't go to a film school. So I was laughing when I was reading that part when you wrote.
You actually bought a Mercedes instead of going to film school.
Yeah. Instead of going to
That's great.
Yeah, that's why I was laughing. I was laughing.
Oh.
I thought I could make a movie anyways. I mean, you know, I could do it. I just need to meet people like you guys. And I mean, I believe the experience you're sharing, it's even more valuable than the school, because the school, they kind of force you to think a certain way. And it's just so cool when you're able to talk to like people like Amanda, and you, Steve, and like discover different things from, it's just, I think it's so amazing, you know.
Well,
and you are an experienced filmmaker. I mean, you were doing it just the same with Amanda, an experienced writer. So Amanda, you said that you wrote a pilot, a horror film. Could you tell a little bit, like, how long is your pilot? And because I need to write a pilot myself, but I don't know like what the format is and what I need to do. So yeah, I met a producer today, and I need to send him a pilot, and I'm thinking on how to better present it. So
the best thing that I would do, because there's a lot of differences in how long they are and how they're set up. The best thing I would recommend is thinking about a couple of shows that are similar in genre to what you want to write. Mm-hmm. And then looking up, a lot of times the pilot scripts are available online. Like, it's pretty easy to find a lot of scripts. There's a site called Drew Scriptorama that has a lot of scripts on it. And then there's just, I mean, if you Google, you can
What's the
Drew's Script-O-Rama.
Drew?
Drew, D-R-E-W.
Mm-hmm.
That has a bunch. But there's also like, just Google whatever shows you think are similar and you'll find. And then I would look at a couple of them and kind of notice where the page breaks are for your page counts for, you know, act 1, act 2. If it's, you know, because there's going to be a big difference if you're doing like a half-hour comedy versus like an hour-long drama. There's also going to be a difference if you're doing something for a streaming service like Netflix versus a network that has like commercial breaks. The page counts and the pacing are going to be a little different. So look at things that are similar to what you're doing in particular is probably the best way to go for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't really written any script, so I'm not like a bad writer as far as like I know how to convey my ideas, but the thing is I've never written like a script. And so what would you suggest for someone like me who've never written a script but needs to do it?
I mean, the same. I would say looking at screenplays and seeing how they're formatted is going to teach you a lot. You know, you're going to see how they format the dialogue, how they write a scene description, how, you know, interior bedroom day, all that kind of stuff is going to be there. There are also screenwriting books that probably, if you've never done it before, it would be a good idea to just grab a couple like books just on basic screenwriting. But really, more than anything else, looking at actual scripts that have been produced is going to be your best bet.
And likewise, you know, I would agree and also say that truly the more scripts you can read, the more it'll just become the language you get used to. And it's a little bit like, you know, if as a filmmaker, I encourage people to be on as many film sets as possible, no matter the size. It could be the lowest, no budget micro shoot with 3 you know, amateur aspiring filmmakers, and it could be a studio movie, but just try to be on every film set you can. And you'll notice
how do you get in there? How do you get in there?
Just well, if you reverse engineer it from be aware right now there's not much happening production wise, but when you see a call for actors, you know, or extras, you know there's a movie happening. So then track down that production manager or the production coordinator and email them and ask if you could shadow the director, or could you come on set and shadow the producer just to be a fly on the wall for one day and observe. And oftentimes, if it's not a big sort of secure top secret thing, most often people are welcome to that. If it's the wrong person or they might have a different personality and they say get lost, maybe that'll happen once or twice. But typically, you know, if somebody called me up and said, hey, can I come and watch you for a day? I'm like, sure, fine. Yeah, great. Especially if it's a low budget.
Can I come and shadow you?
Yes, next time I'm shooting something, but who knows when that'll be. The other thing I was going to recommend is just since it's your first step into writing a screenplay or pilot or any sort of formed thing, if you ever get sort of hesitant or nervous about the structure and the way it looks, because if you look at a screenplay or a pilot, it looks very, very different than a book or an article in a magazine. That's okay, because you're not yet familiar with it. You might choose to handwrite it first. You know, don't worry about the format right away. If you have these concepts and ideas, you know, get them out any way you can. And then later on, when you become more familiar with the way that it should be formatted, either you can then do it yourself, or you can pay someone and hire somebody to translate it from your handwritten copy into the format. You know, if let's say the producer you met with says, oh, I need something next week, and you don't have time to learn it all the way, maybe, you know, work with someone who can. And over time, you know, you'll eventually just become familiar with it. I mean, if you get a software like Final Draft is very popular, and it's pretty much industry standard, the formatting is almost automatic. It just does it for you, and you don't have to worry about it. If you're trying to create the format in Word or another text-based document, it's going to be a headache. So my advice would be to get Final Draft, and they also have some samples in the software. And if you're going to write a TV pilot and it's a sitcom, or if it's not, or if it's a feature length, they have automatic everything pre-laid out for you, and you don't have to do anything except pick, the next line, or is it a character, is it a dialogue, is it an action, etc. But I think, spend a few days, and I think it'll be more comfortable, and you'll get the hang of it pretty easily.
I'd also add to it, if you haven't read Steve's chapter on screenwriting, definitely do that. I've been writing for 25 years, and after reading his chapter and how he basically outlines his scripts, I mean, it kind of blew my mind, because I was doing it so much more difficult over the years. And I'm a self-taught screenwriter, so again, reading as many screenplays as you can find, just backing up what both Amanda and Steve said, but definitely just skip to that part in Steve's book too, is very enlightening.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jake.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, please.
I'm writing a first-time script, and I have this thing where I want as very little dialogue put into it as possible, because I want to see what the people that come on board would say in the moment. But I do have in my head what I would want them to say if what they say is not in line with the theme or the feel of what I would want the character to portray at that moment. I just wanted to know what the amount of dialogue that should actually be written in an official script should be.
Hey, Brooke, it's good that you joined us. I'm so happy you're here. I'm excited to say something, but then I'll let Amanda answer. I have written improv-based features twice, and it's sort of like I have some bullet points of, okay, the scene begins at A, it has to end at C in order to continue. But B really could be anything. So as long as you start at A and end at C, there are 100 ways to process moving through B. And so if you have the resources, the time and money, you could shoot it 5 different ways, the B, and then decide later which one you want to use as long as you end at C. Another trick might be to go ahead and write down for yourself what you think you want them to say, but just don't show them yet, and let them come on the set and give you their version of B, but at least you've got your bottom line safely written somewhere.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking too. I was thinking my script, I want it to be sort of bare bones. Like, this is where, or I don't know what you call it, screenwrite or whatever, but I just wanted to sort of have, okay, this is where we are, this is where we're shooting, this is what you're wearing, this is what's in place in the background, and I know what I want to happen here, but I wanted to sort of see what they do naturally. Is that something that's acceptable as a screenwriter?
Well, if it's, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. I mean, Steve, you have more experience with that particular thing. So you finish, and then I'll add my 2 cents.
If you're producing and you're in charge, you call the shots. If you're trying to sell this to a producer or a production company, they may not believe that and want you to change it, but maybe you'll find someone who will trust that. But if you're in charge, you're in charge, and you don't have to worry about the right way or wrong way. I don't think there's no such thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in that, okay, in a traditional screenplay, if you're going to get paid to be a screenwriter, or you want a production company to produce it, then every line of dialogue is going to be scripted. And then, yes, seasoned performers might add in their own improv or whatever. But traditionally, if you're talking traditionally, then yes, you write out everything. But for what sounds like you want to do, I would recommend, much like Steve said, just doing beats. So you know that, like, this scene, Amanda sees a beautiful woman across the room and is going to ask her out. we don't know how I'm going to do that, but we know like for the scene to end, I've got to ask her out because the next scene is going to be us on a date or whatever. You can do that. You can have the beats and just, you know, give the actors just enough that they know what you need them to do to make the next scene work. Anything that they might need to know about their character's emotional state, like you've just come from your father's funeral, so you're really upset. That's an important thing if that's something that they need to know. So it really, you know, like you said, it really is up to you. If you're doing it yourself and you want to just fully improv it, then do, but just make sure you've got your roadmap and make sure it is that you've got a beat for every scene, that you know what needs to be accomplished so that you don't get lost, because you're going to see all these little magical cool moments and you want to make sure you really strongly remember the thread that needs to get you through the whole thing.
Thank you.
Can I also, from the other side, the actor standpoint, I want to chime in from their standpoint. It's a very delicate thing you're asking actors to do because you want them to improv, so they're creating. So if you have a specific you want, you need to let them know. Don't let them have to guess what you want, because nothing will stop an actor being open to trying something if you go, no, that's not what I want him to say. Mm-hmm. And any actor I know will shut down and go, well, then write the damn thing. Don't have me guess what you want. So I'm just saying, I have been there and I've had that situation, and it shuts down wanting to be part of the process and help you achieve what you want. If you are so specific about what you want, and the actor, because sometimes I've seen it happen where an actor will give you something brilliant that you didn't even think about, and you go, oh my God, that's better than anything I could have come up with. So it's a real delicate balance you're playing here. If you have something so specific that you want actors to improv it and guess what you want them to do. You see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going on, is that I think an actor does better when it comes from inside themselves. So if you say, like, this is your sister, she's your baby sister, you're not going to see her again for 3 years because she's about to be hauled away somewhere, it's unexpected. And you say, what would you portray if you knew this was about to happen? And you let the person from inside themselves feel what their natural organic pain would be. I don't want to miss out on those gems. My favorite director is Terrence Malick. He operates like this. He doesn't really go by the script. He sort of lets it all happen naturally. And if you do conform someone to what your ideal is, you do miss out on those things.
Right. And that's what I'm saying in terms of the freedom. He doesn't think, okay, I want them to think this or say this there. He lets the actor bring that at that moment. And it may take longer than you think. It's like you're going, well, I need to get to that B. We started at A, I need to get to B. Well, the actor with the other actors may be developing something that gets to B, but it may be totally different pace and tempo than you're thinking. Does that make sense?
and it could take 2 hours. You could be like, all right, we have been on A all day.
Yeah. Okay, guys, let's do this.
In that case, stay in there for the next 2 hours on your own. We need to continue. But, you know, those are the things that I just wanted to ask, and I appreciate you hearing my question. I'm nervous because I was going to.
Oh, no, it's good. Hey, Brooke, I'm sorry, Jake, I'll let you.
Right now.
The other thing is twofold. One, when you get to the set and you're finally there and everything's happening, film the rehearsal in moments like that, because the very first time the actor says it might be incredible. And if you aren't already filming, it may never happen that way again. So my advice is to always film just the very first try. Even if it's clunky, doesn't matter. Sometimes it's magical. And then likewise, the 2 scripts that I wrote in a bullet point in order to make as sort of an improv-based film, I also credited my actors who did the improv as co-screenwriters, because it's very important that people get credit where credit is due. And if they're also screenwriters in their own right, sometimes what comes out of their mouth is as if it had been written. It's so perfect. So you really do need to give credit where credit is due if those things happen. And if you're working that way. I mean, you could ask your actor, and if the actor says, oh, I don't want to be credited as a screenwriter, well, that's fine. But when I first heard about that, and I mentioned this in my book, Before Sunset or Before Sunrise, whichever one was the first one. Linklater, Julie Delpy, and Ethan Hawke, he credited them as co-screenwriters, and they were all nominated for the Oscar. And it was just based on their improv that they did as actors.
So are you saying that, like, if I don't have like the dialogue as part of what I have written, but I allow them to create it, I should credit them as screenwriters too?
Yes.
Yeah. And if they don't want to, that's fine, but have the conversation. I mean, you should assume that you will, unless they say, oh no, don't, you know, or whatever.
I never thought of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Jake, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh,
you were going to say something.
I was just going to chime in on the perspective of seeing an improv movie from a crew member and somebody who is working with the actors on the technical side of things and not the directorial side of things. The last project I worked on with Steve was very much like this. I would add, you've got to have the right actors who get it, the right actors who are willing to collaborate, the right actors who have chemistry that can play off and add the dialogue. And I know that when Steve initially asked me to work on this project, it was a very detailed outline. And his first thing was like, we're going to add stuff and improv things as we get there to see what happens. But he always had his structure. And I think both he and Amanda mentioned that having that structure, if you're doing a scene, you have to have your A point of how it's going to enter into the scene and your B point of how it's going to end the scene. And then everything in the middle is whatever you need to let the actors do to get to those points. But without some sort of final structure, you could find yourself filming something for 2 hours and it not getting to the point you're wanting it to make. So I think talking to the actors and letting them know in the scene, this needs to happen and this needs to happen, and anywhere in between works out. And that was just from observation of how Steve directed the actors on this film that we worked on. So I just want to find out that from that perspective.
Which is called Alchemy of the Spirit, and it's in post-production. And it stars Xander Berkeley, Sarah Clark, and Mink Stoll.
And it was filmed here.
And it was filmed in Maine. Before we let Amanda get back to her beloveds and special ones in her life, does anybody have any last question for her? Nobody? Nothing? Really?
I just want to say hi, Amanda. It's been a few years since I got to see you in person, so.
There are questions, but we don't want to.
I know. So good to see you, Jake.
Helltown. Amazon Prime.
Helltown.
Amazing. I will, should anybody need any additional questions or anything, email me later on. If it's a question for Amanda, I can forward it to her anytime anybody needs anything. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today. It was lovely to see you.
Thank you. It's so good. So good to see you. So good to see you, Jake. Lovely to see both of your faces. Miss you.
Send my love to Viv and Kat.
Lovely to see everyone else as well.
and we'll see you again soon. Hopefully in person.
Tell your dad I said happy birthday tomorrow.
I will. Amazing. Well, have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Steve, so much.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.